Good afternoon, everyone. We are now live on Patient Advocates Transforming Healthcare, or PATH, Tuesday Table Talk. Thank you to our audience for joining us for the last table talk of the fall season. We have really had an exciting group of wonderful advocates and experts in the field over the last few months discussing so many different issues in healthcare. And I've really been privileged and honored to be part of those conversations. So if today's your first day joining us, or you've been along with us for the whole ride, thank you for supporting PATH and our table talks. And I thought it would be fitting to end our final table talk for the fall season, bringing in some of my fellow PATH leaders. And so today's talk is one that I'm super excited about, and I know is going to be very insightful and very passionate. And I couldn't be more blessed to share this group with these wonderful advocates that have really been not only a support to me in so many different ways, but inspire me each and every day to learn and to be better and to really push healthcare in the ways that we all seek to transform it in an equitable and compassionate way. So I am really pleased to welcome Desiree, Jerry, Kimberly, Nikki, Ogo, and Sherry today. Many of you will recognize them because they've been on previous table talks. So certainly I am very much looking forward to introducing them and starting this conversation off. Today is really about looking at 2020 and really what's that looked like for us in our individual work, what's that looked like in our collective work, and how do we kind of see healthcare going forward, and what opportunities are there, what barriers there are. And so, first of all, I've put you all on the screen so that our audience can see everyone all at once. And I'm going to go ahead and let everyone know that if you'd like to ask any questions during our conversation, please feel free to use the chat feature in YouTube. You must be signed in for YouTube, and we'll try to get to your questions. Today will be a special 1 hour table talk, so hopefully we're able to discuss all of these issues and maybe get to some questions and answers. So I just want to first ask very briefly if each of you could just give a very brief introduction of yourselves, and then we'll jump into the conversation. So I'm going to first ask if Jerry could introduce herself, and then I will call on everyone else to join afterwards.
Sure. I'm Jerry Baumblett, and I've been working in really at the nexus of patient education, engagement, but also clinician experience and engagement, and increasingly looking at the family caregiver as part of that equation and how that impacts people being able to maintain their own health, let alone the health of the people they care for, but also how it contributes to the health and ability and well-being of clinicians to do their work, and really have started to focus on ways employers can also start to support family caregivers, whether they're in a healthcare setting and they employ clinicians, or really any setting, and how those things vary. And then the other big project that I work on is really working with a social good organization that has a free platform to help deliver resources from clinicians to patients and families. So lots of overlap and an opportunity there to kind of help figure out how we bring everybody together to give them the information, the resources, and the understanding that they need in the moment that they need it. I think is so much of the challenge, because with caregiving, I come from a medical family, and even with 2 doctors, a nurse, a social worker, and a me, like, you're just so quickly blown apart. You put a care plan in place, that gets blown apart, and you just can't know what you don't know. And you need so much help from all different quarters to orient yourself and figure out what you're doing day to day, even moment to moment.
Thank you, Jerry. Desiree, do you mind going next?
Sure. I'm Desiree Collins Bradley. Oh, wear many different hats like many of my co-panelists, but I'm the mother of a very medically complex little girl, and it's that journey that kind of threw me in head first into healthcare quality improvement before I even knew that was a thing. So now, I do a lot of things locally in the Houston metropolitan area. I also manage a patient partner innovation community, a patient network to empower the everyday community member, hopefully to inspire them to go into action in their healthcare environment. And, I'm just, I tell people I'm a caregiver as well. I take care of my daughter. My mother has advanced stages of Alzheimer's. And so it's been interesting to see the difference between pediatric care and geriatric care is so grossly different and was such a harsh reality to me because I'm so used to that wonderful womb of pediatric care. And so, now, and all thing I always move in the essence of health equity and disparities. And so now I'm even more charged as to say, okay, this is such a vulnerable population, and how can we advocate for them, as well as, like Jerry said, taking care of the caregiver, because caregiver burnout is a real thing. So yeah, I'm excited to have the conversation, I can't wait to see where this conversation goes, and we can dig a little bit deeper a little while later.
Thank you, Desiree. Kimberly, do you mind going next?
Sure. Hala, thank you for having us today. I am an ovarian cancer patient advocate. One of the things I am deeply involved in is research advocacy, making sure that patients, as they go through their survivorship, find their way into advocacy in meaningful ways. Many of us start out in awareness advocacy, probably get involved in policy advocacy, but rarely do we delve into research advocacy, which is basically understanding the fundamentals of cancer research. And so that's what I've been doing mostly this year, just really trying to find concrete ways for patient advocates, for patients, caregivers to learn, educate themselves in the concepts of cancer research. And so I see the possibilities are starting to be endless in terms of who's interested in wanting to do this kind of work. I've gotten involved with MD, PhD students over this last year, some oncologists who are doing research, and finding myself in company with other oncologists in relationship to disease teams, talking on panels about research advocacy, and just making sure that we include that level of advocacy as empowering, right? Because we can share our story, but that story has so much more meaning when we can back it up with the evidence-based conversations. And so I think that's my contribution to advocacy at this point, helping all patients, regardless of whether it's cancer or not, to really understand scientific inquiry. And then when we have that level of education, it not only helps us in advocacy, but it also helps us back with our physicians in making sure that we can have conversations around shared decision making. So you're not just doing what your physician tells you to do, but you can contribute to the conversation and the decisions around your treatment options.
Thank you, Kimberly. Nikki, do you mind going next?
Sure. Thank you, Hala, for having all of us here. My work has lately been a lot in safety and in policy. So I'm very passionate about safety in pediatric settings, particularly because I, like Desiree, am the parent of a very complex kiddo, and that has really charted my path for me. I'm an author of several patient safety books that are pointed to children, and I think involving pediatric patients in their own safety and advocacy is very important for the long run, especially for those of us who have children who are going to have medical needs their whole lives, but also activating their families to understand what caregiving means and what is involved in that and how they can be better at it and how they can advance their own mindset and critical thinking to be better at it. So all of those arenas have come together in some of my work. And during this COVID period, it's been somewhat difficult to get involved in safety in the hospital setting as much because the hospitals are so laser focused on COVID that, you know, the work that I was participating in on CLABSI, for example, or on Falls, that work is not moving forward the same way and at the same pace. So just balancing out those differences in priorities and then also preparing families to be safe and to participate in that safety effort in a hospital setting, even during COVID, I think is so important now.
Thank you, Nikki. Ogo, can you go next?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to see everyone this afternoon. I feel like I don't see all of you guys enough. For those who don't know me, my name is Ogo Kweme. I am a health systems engineer. I actually am 100% full on into my own organization, Career Haven, and what we focus on is empowering healthcare organizations to assist and build better structures around clinicians who also have family care responsibilities at home. What we're learning as we delve deeply into this phenomenon is that our health system doesn't have enough structures to support both family care and patient care. We hyper focus on the patient and the patient's family, which is good. There's nothing wrong with that. But then the clinicians and their ability to manage their own family care sometimes is left out of the conversation. And so we're working heavily to try to get healthcare organizations to rethink how they operate around the phenomenon of family care, how that ultimately impacts patient safety, and how we can build a better healthcare system that values the fact that our clinicians are heavily involved in caring outside of the walls of the hospital. This year has been a very eye-opening year, beyond just COVID, but really digging into learning how our healthcare system is structured from a managerial perspective and how that sometimes clashes with family values, and how do we now, walk it back and start to embed more family value driven strategies and mirror the two, create that bridge between the two, and create something more wholesome and something that truly is supportive for the clinicians. For me, I always say we talk about clinician burnout a lot. It's like the holy grail or the topic of the time, but what does it really mean and what's really behind it? And are we just addressing symptoms instead of talking about root cause? And so that for us, we feel one of those root causes is the fact that we don't pay attention to our clinicians' family responsibilities and how that compounds what they feel in the workspace. So this year's really, opened our eyes to it. And through COVID, we're really thinking about, well, what happens next? So many of our clinicians were at the boiling point before COVID. Now, after COVID, what then? What do we do? And we already know our pipeline is dwindling. And how can we re-engage those who are on the cusp of deciding to leave the workforce? And then how do we prepare our new clinicians to take the mantle? Because this isn't something that's going to go away. As we know, our population is aging, and that's creating its own set of challenges that we also have to prepare our workforce for, as well as our employers. So thank you guys for your support this year. It has been, phenomenal. Even just the words of advice have really helped to bring greater focus to the work that we're doing. So I really do appreciate this group.
Thank you, Ogo. Sherry?
Hi. I'm not gonna lie, it's very intimidating being called on last, and everyone is so accomplished and doing really interesting work. So I thank you for having me. I am a 2-time cancer survivor, and I was diagnosed the first time in my mid-20s. So I've been a patient longer the second half of my life and plus. This is how I got into this work, was I really wanted to get involved and help cancer patients and help them to make the experience just a little bit better. So I worked for a variety of organizations, and I would say my passion has just really been around elevating the patient voice and really understanding that patients have a lot to say, and what hospital organizations think patients want and need is often different than what they want and need. And we need to talk to them more to really get a sense of what's important to them. And, you know, with COVID, this is like a perfect example of potentially, you know, things happened so quickly. And there were instances where, you know, information was coming out from hospitals, which wasn't what I wanted and what I needed. So my most recent sort of collaborative effort has been through the Barrel Institute with as co-chair of the Patient Experience Policy Forum. And this is really a group that's advocating for policy change and is made up of half, you know, 50% patients, 50% hospital leaders. And, you know, this has been an opportunity to really look at what we could do better, especially in this environment with COVID. And we've done a lot of writing this year and trying to put out some policy statements about how to work better with patients, how to listen, you know, our thoughts about visitation policies, which is, you know, one of those sort of things that's been really difficult for most people during this crisis. Independent from that, just because, like someone said earlier, we wear a lot of hats. I'm also kind of veered off a little bit, but not really. Still in the patient advocacy mode, but I am a graduate student at the University of Maryland School of Pharmacy, majoring in a master's in cannabis science and therapeutics. And the reason I have chosen this path is because this is another area where I feel like there are patients aren't educated. They don't have the advocacy around this alternative medicine, don't understand it. And, you know, if we want to talk about COVID again, people are really anxious. So what are people doing? They're going to the store and buying CBD oil. And it's not as simple as that. It's unregulated, it can be very unsafe. And so I've been really concerned about being able to credibly educate both patients and physicians in a space that's not going away, that's actually growing. So that's kind of where a lot of my passion is when I cut it in half. But you know, it's all connected, and I just think it's an area that hasn't gotten a lot of attention, and I do worry about the safety for patients in general. So thank you for having me, and I'm sure we'll talk more about everything later.
Thanks, Sherry, and thanks everyone. So, you know, we know that 2020 has been unlike any other year ever for most of us, even though I know we've all had our different trials and tribulations, you know, in our different healthcare journeys and the reason many of us are in this work. However, this year is like no other, between a pandemic, between an elevated conversation around racial injustice and structural racism and equity, around a tumultuous election year, and so on and so forth. Children not being in school, having to live lives very differently than what we're accustomed to, I think has been, you know, obviously personally challenging. However, I think the uniqueness of our work, because we're in healthcare, has also showed us some other sides of this work. And certainly we know, in terms of just in general, patient, family, caregiver, and community engagement has certainly faced its challenges because of the restrictions around COVID. And so I just wanted maybe each of you a couple minutes to just talk about how has 2020 impacted your work professionally? And perhaps, how has that seeped in personally, if you'd like to share that. But, what have you seen that you feel has been really something to celebrate? And perhaps maybe some things that have served as a challenge or a barrier that you want to kind of lift up so that we can look to strategies in how to change things, especially as we get ready to go into a new year. So I'm going to go around again, but I'm going to change the order this time. Nikki, could you kick us off?
Sure. I think that 2020, of course, it's been a crazy year, but one of the things that I've seen as a benefit is there is so much more conversation about equity and diversity happening. My biggest concerns are that while those conversations are happening, how are patients and families being brought into those conversations? Are they being effectively paid for their time? Are they being honored and respected in those spaces? So, but the biggest concern I see is when there are organizations that have not had an eye on diversity before, who pull that view in now and then want kind of freebies from patient advocates and patients to help them along that path. While this should be a partnership, there's still that balance there of not wanting to enter a space that hasn't been important to you prior, of not knowing whether that's a safe space for patients and families to be in. And those are reasons that patients and families may not be eager to jump into those spaces. So the equity conversation, I think, is wonderful. The sustainability of that is my concern, because I don't want it to be a fad. Because it's not a fad for me when I enter healthcare. The diversity issues are all part and parcel of my patient experience as both a patient and as a care partner. So my biggest concern is that as we're gearing up, and this is exciting conversation to be part of, and people are having these new initiatives and they're ready to go, how are we going to sustain this in a way that is respectful of patients and families and really honors that work too? So I'd say for me, that's been the biggest change, because I've had lots of inquiries this year. But I've also had lots that I turned down because I didn't feel that the environment was ripe for my participation. That's kind of where I am with 2020.
Thank you, Nikki. And I certainly couldn't agree more with everything you just said. How about Kimberly? Do you mind going next?
Yeah, 2020 has been a truly interesting year for me in so many myriads of ways. The first half of the year, the first couple of months into the year were fantastic in terms of my patient advocacy work, assembling 5 of our teaching hospitals here in Chicago around gynecological oncology. Doing that summit was incredible, to bring oncologists and young researchers and caregivers and patient advocates together, all in one room to talk about all aspects of gynecological cancer was fantastic. Moving into April, as national news broke about the disproportionate amounts of African Americans infected and actually dying from COVID-19, started to impact my patient advocacy in different ways. And like Nikki was saying, the more I talked about it, the more people wanted to have you on a panel, right? And it wasn't so much then about the content of what I may have had to say, but more the optics, because everybody was so into claiming diversity, which probably before that national announcement, before George Floyd, was not necessarily happening. And I know it wasn't happening in my own particular levels of patient advocacy. And so that was the charge for me, to sort of figure out my space and to create my own boundaries of how I wanted to be represented on those panels, and still speaking out and making sure that from both a a cancer patient perspective, as a mother with 19-year-old twins, boy and girl, who are navigating straight out of high school and wanting to be with their friends during COVID, right? Having to go to work. My daughter was an essential worker, and how that was going to impact me as a cancer patient. All of those things were coming at me, just sort of bombarding me over those first couple of months into COVID. And my questioning the level of information that I had as a patient advocate, and why that information about antibody testing and how plasma was being used at the time to help to treat patients, why that wasn't trickling down into my community. And being able to be on panels and to have that conversation and say, and have the forethought to be able to say, when the vaccines do come out, don't be surprised if African-American communities and residents aren't running towards that vaccine, but basically taking a more pensive position and saying, next time I'll wait, you go first, right? Because of what we experienced between April and August. What were they actually doing to take care of us in the healthcare system, right? And some of that wasn't necessarily looked upon like, oh, how could she be speaking about those kinds of things? But I think the racial tensions between April and August sort of freed us and liberated a lot of people to start having those honest conversations on panels, and to start talking a little less about identifying the problem and a lot more about encouraging people to come up with solutions.
Thank you, Kimberly. And your words always resonated with me, especially when you said, you know, it's enough talking about the problems. We have to talk about solutions now. We know the problems. We've heard the problems. We see the problems, but now we must commit to the solutions. And I think that's somewhere where, you know I've spoken to all of you and other colleagues around, you know, this bridge we have to make between advocacy and activism, where we really have to activate ourselves in such a way where we really are pushing a more solutions-oriented agenda in this work, in whatever space of this work you're in. Sherry, I'd love to hear from you next.
So there's just so much that's going on in my brain right now. I mean, this has been a crazy year. It's overwhelming for so many reasons. You know, on a personal level, it's overwhelming because having had cancer twice, you know, I'm definitely supposedly in that group of being a very high risk. And so that's really scary. And, you know, you're sort of dealing with that day to day. And then on top of it, it's that the whole political environment around COVID has been really frustrating, and the media and sort of what's presented and what's not presented is so frustrating. And like, as someone who I advocate for myself, and what I tend to do is just learn on my own, because it's hard to really get a handle on a subject unless you really delve into it. And I think, you know, the fact that we're so divided about, like, you know, COVID in general, should you wear a mask, not wear a mask, it's a political statement, you know, I'm sure people saw it. I just saw something, you know, I think it was in North Dakota, these people who are all dying of COVID, and they're like, I don't have COVID. And like, that's their last dying words. I don't have COVID. So it's really been frustrating about, you know, and I feel like I am reading so much, and then I have access, you know, to people in healthcare. But even just talking to friends or whatever, I mean, there's so much misinformation out there. So it's been overwhelming. And I wanted to touch on points a couple people made, which is, you know, one of the reasons I decided to go to graduate school and do something slightly different is because I have felt like I'm just talking and not doing. I feel like a lot of times, I mean, I'm on a panel or I'm in a meeting and, you say what you say. And a lot of times people are like, oh, wow, that's really interesting. That's great. But, that's as far as it goes. And I just got burned out from it a little bit. And, I do think it's important to get your thoughts out there and do writing and things like that. But I do question whether or not that really changes anything. And so that's one of the reasons I decided to kind of carve myself into a different space where I felt like I did have more control. I hope I do. And just, just on a political note too, just on the other personal things that I'm doing, there were a lot of items on the ballots this year about legalizing marijuana, and they all passed. And right now, 1 in 3 Americans have access to marijuana in some form, yet we have absolutely no support around it. And doctors are not taught anything about cannabis. So when you read on the label, before you use this, talk to your doctor. I mean, honestly, you're not going to get anywhere with your doctor because they're not educated about it. So, I just think there's a lot of things that concern me. And I think COVID is a big one. And, I am concerned about the vaccine because there's a lot of hype around it. But then, like, what if people don't want to take it? How good is it going to be? And so how do we really connect with people? And it's back to patient education. How do we really educate them on the real scientific facts and what's most important, and get away from the political, the politicized components of it all?
Thank you, Sherry. Ogo, do you mind going next?
Sure. Thank you guys. I'm loving the action words. Let's get away from talking about it. Let's do something. I'm all for that because, like I said, I hear burnout. We're burnt out. We're tired. Like even before Career Haven, I did a lot of work on the floors and working with clinical teams, and I hear it. But then, well, where are the solutions? Oh, we gave them donuts, and we have an awards program, or things that I think gestures of kindness that do in the moment kind of soften things, but they never really drill down to the meat of the matter. So I think that's why I love doing what I do. And COVID was a wake up call for me. If you guys can believe, right before we shut down, I woke up at 4 a.m. in the morning. I'm in like caregiver support groups. And I read a post, and the young lady had said, I am scared to death of losing my job, and all I just want to do is take care of my family. And that was it for me. I said, okay, I got to do this work. I've got to push because we have people who they're on the front lines. They're working for us. They're doing so much, but just the level of support they need to maintain their own well-being and their own sanctity, it's not there, and we're not seeing it, and it's hidden. I call it the hidden problem of healthcare, where we're not seeing the cries and the I need help from our clinical staff. But we're doing such great work, such important work. And COVID has really transitioned my thoughts around, well, how do we kind of make our healthcare system do the right thing? We've been asking for permission for a long time, or begging people to do the right thing. It's time that we actually make the system do the right thing. But it's a strategic approach where we have to really find those key pillars and align them in a way that makes sense operationally, but then also actually produces the change we want to see in the environment. And one of the biggest things I've learned this year is trust is the key to a lot of what we want to see. Do our patients, do our clinicians actually trust our healthcare system? Most of them will say no. If they gave you their real thoughts, they will say no. But then when you look at the organizational structure, do they trust the structure of healthcare? Was it pieced together, at least in some sense of, makes sense in some way. They'll say, yeah, it makes sense how this piece fits with that piece and all of that. But do we trust it? Do we really trust it? And I think COVID is it opened that door that we don't really trust the system we hold up. And if we don't fix that, well, I can only imagine what the next decade will look like. I can only imagine what post-COVID will look like for the clinicians I work with. I don't even know if they'll still be working, because do they really trust what they're propping up and what we're preaching? And it takes some of us to stop asking permission and actually start aligning those key pillars to get the work done. So yeah, this has been a very challenging year. It's really challenged me from a healthcare advocate perspective, from an engineering perspective, from a consultant's perspective, and from a patient perspective. I have family members who, they have conditions that require us to really pay attention to their health. And, I'm like, I do all this great work, but I don't see it. We write all these reports, but I don't see it. And it's like, that has to change. That really has to change. And I think that's why I'm such a data geek. I need to see the data. I want to see that there's movement, that something's happening. So yeah, COVID, this is some interesting times, but I think we'll be better for it as a society if we actually move the needle forward on these key issues and we're not just talking about it.
Absolutely. Desiree, do you mind going next?
Sure. So again, like Sherry, my mind is like it's going off. But I'll start on the personal level first. Trying to manage, and I'll say this, I was busy before, busy meaning in airports all over the country, going here, helping. And then COVID hits and all of that kind of was at a halt. So I'll say I almost kind of had a sigh of relief, like, oh, I'm home. I can kind of reconnect as a family unit. And then we did virtual school, right? So I'm trying to manage the whole virtual school thing. And for those that are tuning in that have children in virtual learning environment, it is a challenge, even for your A+ scholar student. Now you have my daughter who is hearing impaired, needs those extra supports. How do we get the support she needs? And I'm trying to manage 100 Zooms a day. So that has been, on a personal note, really, I've had to take a strategic look at my own time management. And that kind of segues into my professional choices, whereas people would call me, hey, Desiree, could you help me do this? Hey, Desiree, can you come over here? And I'll be like, okay, that's fine. Pop in, do a panel, help somebody over there. But then I had to take a step back. One of the benefits, I think, for me personally, COVID-19 has done is really made me take a strategic look at the work that I'm doing, the workmates that I'm aligning with. And I say workmates, that's patient advocates, hospital systems, national organizations, to really look at, am I really making an impact here? And one of the other speakers has spoke about, is it just, when the George Floyd murder happened, everybody all of a sudden, health disparities, health equity. This has been going on way before, things happened with George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement. But now all of a sudden, you guys want to put this as a focus in your organizations. And so, I'll be honest, it made me kind of take a second look and really think about, well, do I really want to align myself with this organization or work? Because is this really something that they're committed to doing? Or, is it something they're just doing to say, oh, we're doing this, come on over here. And so I really had to take a step back and say, you know what, Desiree, what is your worth, in all honesty, and where can you make the most impact? So like Nikki, I can't tell you how many opportunities I've turned down, and I'll say lucrative opportunities. But at the end of the day, and I had this conversation recently with a colleague, and I said, I cannot step on those coming underneath me, meaning persons of color, vulnerable populations, at the benefit of $1. I can't sell my soul for $1. So that's really one of the things I've had to take a really strategic look at, which, thank you, COVID, for really gleaming a light on this for me personally and professionally. And then when I think about COVID-19 and beyond into, 2021, I have seen innovation. Yes, a lot of hospital systems have had to put their PFE efforts on hold, but we've also seen where they have had to pivot and think outside the box. Like I tell people, leveraging the power of social media. I mean, before I know patient advocates that didn't even have a Twitter account. Now they're like tweeting and getting involved. Hospital systems now have Facebook groups, whereas legal would be like, we're running away from social media. So they've been pushed to have to think outside the box and be innovative. And then the other win, I'll say, as it relates to patient partner innovation community, is really bringing in those voices that have been kind of left out. So, and you guys know when you're in this work, whether it's technical expert panels, measurement work, a lot of times it's the same national advocates ringing around the rosy, shaping the narrative. Well, where we've really charged is brought in, voices into the work had no experience with measurement work. None whatsoever. They're community members, beauticians and barbers and pastors and, church leaders and your neighbor next door to really jump in and say, hey, we need your voice in this work. Let me help you, get you prepared to be in the room with all these other multi-stakeholders so that your voices can be heard. Because I'll be honest with you, I am really fed up and tired of the same people shaping the narrative for our communities. And I know personally, us at PBIG, ATW Health Solutions, we're like, nah, enough is enough. It's time for me to help those patient advocates make sure they're prepared to sit at the table and shape their own narrative. Because I'm telling you, I'm getting passionate because I'm fed up. I am completely fed up with this. And, that for me is innovation. I see that as a win. And I can't tell you how many advocates come back to me and they're like, this was a little intimidating, but I didn't even know this existed. This is why I do what I do every day. So I'll stop. I don't want us to run out of time.
No. And thank you for sharing that passion, because certainly that's something I know you and I have talked about, and many of us in this group have talked about. And I think it's certainly something that needs to be heard, because I think we've lived in these spaces where we don't talk about those things because of fear, because of intimidation, perhaps even a little bit of bullying, to be quite honest, because we are so passionate, we want to do the work, and yet we know if we say certain things, we may not have the opportunity to do the work. And so it's always this balance of, well, how much do I push and how many steps do I take back? But I think for me, I've really come to this place similar to what many of you shared, where it's like, you know what? I only have so much time, and I want it to be appreciated. I wanted it to be valued, because ultimately I got into this work because of my own family's journey and supporting other families like ourselves and our fellow communities and our citizens. And so if I'm not in a role that's meaningful and authentic and truly an equal partner in an equitable way, then what am I doing? What am I really doing at the end of the day? And I think, as much as that's a challenge, it's also been a blessing to come to that realization and feel like I have power in my voice in whatever space that may be. Jerry, I'd love to hear your comments as well.
Yeah, my gosh, there's so many things I want to respond to. I feel like part of it is the visibility that COVID gave to things inadvertently, seeing patients in their own homes and what they're actually dealing with, seeing that everybody who's working is caregiving more than ever. People are struggling with how to do that. So Nikki and Sherry and I, we were working with the PX Policy Forum, trying to just say, family caregivers are not visitors. And I had my own experience where it really meant the difference between my mom getting the right medication or not just that I was on the phone, but that my sister-in-law, who's a physician, was on the phone and like caught something that could have been really important. But then you also see now that like the nurses and the clinical staff, they rely on the caregivers, and they're the ones now who are sitting there and they are burdened by being the only ones who can be with people as they're like going through these horrible and end of life situations. And I think that the experiences are unfortunately what change things. And I'm trying to figure out, how do we give people more of these experiences? Because the ignorance and the lack of the experience has real damage. I'm thinking of simple things like, Sherry, I know a woman who told me that her mother just asked her doctor about CBD, medical marijuana, just CBD. And she later got to look at her medical record, and her doctor had written down, patient started smoking marijuana. And you're just like, what? And by the way, every other clinician this woman's going to is like reading that, and she didn't know it was in there. And that's even a small one. But and then recently, I've really seen, we all have, I think, clinicians be forced, or offices be forced to do things that they wouldn't otherwise do, and then actually go, oh, telemedicine actually works better than I thought. And oh, not just that, but I was talking literally yesterday to this nurse who really, really wanted to start doing some of their education online because their patients were in a rural setting and were traveling and missing days of work. And this created an opportunity to do that because they had no other way to do this education safely. And the clinician, who was older, was against it, but now he loves it, not just because that his patients are happier, but now when they come in, instead of them going to this class, he gets more one-on-one time with them and gets to know them. And it's also a better experience for him. And Ogo was talking about trust. And we know that trust is really warmth and competence. And the clinicians and the patients and the family caregivers, they all need that experience of warmth. And I feel that we just need to give people these experiences, and then it clicks for them. And I think the data is important, but I think they have to have that experience. One last story is, I was talking to this patient, and she created a short shared decision-making tool because there's decision aids for big moments in time often and things like that. But when you're a chronic condition patient and you're seeing somebody all the time, and she loves her doctor, but she said, hey, I'm working on this. She's actually doing working with researchers to create this tool. And I think just to be nice, because she was his patient, he's like, sure, I'll try it. And apparently after just one day, he was like, this is completely changing my conversations with my patients. He goes, I had no idea how hard I was driving these conversations and how I was never getting to some of their critical questions. And I think the same thing is happening with caregiving, that now that people are experiencing it for themselves, they're like, oh, this is like all consuming and overwhelming. And I get it now. And unfortunately, I think we have to really figure out ways, even if it's just for an hour or a day, to say, I know you have these preconceived notions. We just want to try this and see how the experience plays out for people. Because I think until they have that emotional connection and saliency to it, it's just like when they talk about the COVID numbers, we're all blind now to the numbers at some point. Like, it's just more numbers, So I think like what the NewsHour does every Friday, showing, profiling different people who have passed away, that's where you're like, oh, this is horrible. This is really impacting people's lives. So I think that's where we really have the work to do, whether it's with clinicians or employers or anybody, is to help them have that experience so that they can, it has that saliency for them.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you all for sharing. I certainly, everything everyone said resonated so much with me. In these last few minutes, I was wondering if each of you, if you had to pick one hope or one opportunity you see for 2021 in terms of your work, what would that be? And I know we could name a lot, but if you had to pick one, what would that one be for you? And if we could, we're going to go ahead and go around again. So sorry to put the first person on the spot to have to think of this so quickly, but I'm going to actually ask Desiree to kick us off on this last question in these final few minutes.
Sure. And this question is pretty easy for me. My one big hope, obviously, from our previous comments, is to engage more everyday community members into the work that have no experience, don't even know, like I was green as grass long ago, that PFE, healthcare quality, is a thing, to get them involved in the work, to bring fresh voices, like Jerry said, fresh stories, fresh experiences into the work.
Thanks, Desiree. Ogo?
For me, it would be to see more employers, healthcare organizations specifically, think less about liability. I feel like liability keeps us from actually doing good work. Put the liability hat down, put on the compassion hat, the emotion hat, the just being human hat, and think about things from the context of, if you were your own employee, what would you want to provide for yourself? And I think, once organizations do that, then we can start to have conversations about, well, here's a solution. Here's a solution. Here, we can do this. And then clinicians can now see that their work environment can become a safe haven to really ask for the resources they need, the emotional support that they need. I think just traditionally, we have not given enough breathing room for clinicians to be human. And I think it's time that we do that. So I hope to see that next year.
Thank you. Jerry?
I think part of it for me, a big part of it is I really want to see leaders engage. So whether it's leading around vaccines, showing that, hey, I'm going to take this first and show that it's safe and be that person, or I'm going to talk about my caregiving experience with my employees. I'm going to actually let people know I'm leaving for a week to take care of somebody or something. I feel like that's what we really need to see, is people won't get that sense of safety, and the culture change won't happen unless the leaders show that these things are safe and okay to do.
Thank you. Sherry?
Sorry. It's always, to me, about engaging the patient. And I just really hope that the patients are really engaged to be able to tell what they need and what they want. And, like telemedicine, for example, is something that, organizations there were so many obstacles to doing it and so many reasons you couldn't do it. And then when COVID came, all of a sudden we were doing it right away, and it was working way better than I think anyone thought. And I do think there's a place for that going forward. There's pros and cons, but I think people in general, I know, having had cancer, and going into these appointments where you didn't need blood work, but you had to drive an hour into traffic and you didn't feel well and all this stuff. I think the fact that people could just turn on their computer and have a meeting with their doctor is been eye-opening and really impactful and really improved quality of life. And so I really hope that certain things that we've done because of COVID stay or are reevaluated, but with patient input, so that we can really, I think move forward in a positive way and take some of the things that we learned and implement them permanently.
Thanks, Sherry. Kimberly?
I think the thing that if I had to, my takeaway would be on two fronts. Representation matters. That from when we talk about issues that affect patients, that we should get beyond the platitudes. patients need to be at the table. That makes common sense. When we talk about diversity and inclusion, our experts that are people of color should be at the table. I think we just need to be beyond the platitudes. If we're going to start talking about creating solutions, you can't create a solution without the people that are being affected at the table, giving you that input and helping you to create those solutions. Some of this is so commonsensical that that's the part that sort of burns. So at this point, if I thought about anything else I'd like to see in 2020, is for us to stop playing these games with one another and acting as if we don't know, and doing better.
Thank you, Kimberly. Nikki?
Yes, it's hard to follow all of that, but my biggest thing now is hope. Like, I think there is a possibility of change for our healthcare system. It's absolutely possible, but we have to be committed to tearing down the things that are destroying our healthcare system and destroying equity and destroying quality and destroying participation. So I would say hope and dismantle would be my 2 words side by side.
Thank you, Nikki. Well, unfortunately, we are at the end of our time, and I knew this was going to go super fast, and I really wish we had a whole day to just talk. And I really am looking forward to the hope that all of us can see one another in person in 2021. And I also hope that everyone stays healthy and safe, and that we truly do listen to one another and support one another, and remember that we are all in this together. And so that to me is my hope and my wish and my prayer. And I also want to say again, as we are kind of now approaching Thanksgiving in the coming days, I'm so grateful and so thankful for all of you and our other fellow PATH members who cannot be here today, but are here in spirit. You all have inspired me. I've learned from all of you. I value your friendship, and I value being your colleague and your partner. And so I'm really, really thankful that we've been able to come together in this way. And I hope that we continue to do so in the future. Thank you for our audience for joining us today on our final PATH Tuesday Table Talk for the fall season. We look forward to more table talks starting again in January. If you haven't caught some of our other ones, they all live on YouTube, so please check them out. We've had some really great conversations over the last several months, and I encourage you to look into those. And again, thank you to our audience. If everyone could just pause for the next few seconds until we wrap up the stream. Happy holidays to everyone. Wishing everyone peace, health, and good blessings always. Thanks again, and have a great day.